Hello, all. My name is Andrew Wright the first. Good to be talking to you all using this forum. The thing that I want to discuss tonight is the merit or lack thereof of women in combat, women in combat roles. Being a military historian and having the idea of a lecture or what I would talk about a lecture is it would be and then you had to come across the idea of something that would bring about discussion, something that would bring about positive arguments about the topic. This was something that I thought was very possible to talk about to being a military story. So the first thing I want to say, first and foremost, is I am in favor of any action that makes our United States military, our armed forces, stronger. I think that that is something that anytime a change is made, if it makes our military stronger, if it puts us in a direction that we can go and fight wars better, then I'm 100% for it. That being said, there are some issues that I have currently with them changing the current combat formation and allowing women in combat. And let me say this: my dissertation is on tanks and United States Army's armor during Operation Iraqi Freedom and major combat operations between 2003 and 2011. I've already done over 30 interviews with veterans, current command sergeant majors, current first sergeants, current lieutenant colonels, current division sergeant majors, current company first sergeants, current platoon sergeants, former platoon sergeants. So I've done a pretty good wide range of interviews for people to try to get their opinions about a lot of things that pertains to armor. And I've had the privilege to interview both armor crewmen, senior enlisted armor crewmen, and senior enlisted cavalry scouts within the United States Army. One of the things I will say is that when you speak to people who are active duty and who are currently in high ranking positions, especially since the fact I did not interview anyone who was less than a platoon sergeant, less than an enlisted grade 7 or E7 for us who are in the military. I got to actually speak with people who've been in the military for several years and been to several different deployments. Some of the people I talked to have been to 5 or 6 deployments in their career. So the topic of this discussion is did they United States military, the brass, changing the the military and allowing women into combat MOS to have a combat MOS, what does that mean for our armed forces, and did that make our armed forces better? So the first thing we have to look at is the parallels. One of the things that I noticed is there were some people who I did not interview, just those who given their opinion, and they made the comparison to when Harry S. Truman in 1948 desegregated the United States military to when the women were allowed to, or to women now being able to go into combat MOS. I think that is very erroneous to do that, but I'm going to talk about it nonetheless. Some of the things that are true, some of the things that align, I will say this. You had a group of people who at one point were not allowed to do certain jobs within the United States military. And a new government, a new administration made a decision and changed that ability for that group of people to serve in different MOSs, in different military occupational specialties, and different military jobs. So those two things do align correctly. You had two separate people who were given opportunities to do jobs, and I think that's great. I think that those two things line up. So, but that's about as far as they go, as far as what they align to, and what similarities those two things have. Both, I will say this: both situations, you had visionaries. You had visionaries with the administration in 1948, and you had visionaries with the administration in our lifetime where women were allowed to do combat MOS. The difference is, the glaring difference is, for African Americans prior to President Truman desegregating the United States military, there were a very small amount of jobs that African Americans could do before then. Very small amount. When it now, when it came to combat, all MOSs were open to them, but they were segregated. And the bad equipment, the poor training, the poor opportunities to train. Okay, now I will say this: if you look at the history of African Americans in the armed forces, you will see that they constantly proved themselves in combat. They constantly made the most of what little they had, what little they were given, the crappy equipment, the crappy training schedule. They made the most of those situations. I will say, although they were given a short enough to stick, they constantly proved themselves in combat. The one thing I will say is that when it comes to women, nothing was held back from women. I'll take the Army for example. The Army has over 250 jobs, over 250 MOSs. Our combat MOSs, and I say ours as a soldier, as a veteran, are Cavalry Scouts, which is our Army's recon, okay, infantry, field artillery, and armor, okay, being a tanker. Of the Army's over 250 jobs, only four, okay, I want to say that again, only four jobs in the entire United States Army, okay, was being held back from women, okay? In the Marine Corps, they have field artillery, okay, infantry, and before here of late, before 2019, they had armor. So they had only three jobs that women weren't allowed to do, right? And the idea that women could not take part in combat is false, because there were women who were combat military police women, okay, and then there were combat aviators. I was glad to take part in several missions where there was a woman who was providing overwatch, air overwatch, or air cavalry with us, and they could lay into the enemy as well as a man can, if you want my personal opinion. So the question is, did allowing women into infantry, into armor, into field artillery make our United States Armed Forces better? And I would argue no. And the reason I would argue that is because several reports within the United States Army, several reports have said that the United States Armed Forces, okay, the United States Army, United States Marine Corps. Now, both of those are the backbone of the fighting service. Let me say this: I love the Navy and the Air Force. If it wasn't for the airmen and the Navy, I would not be here alive talking to you today. But what I will say is that when it comes to ground fighting, when it comes to artillery, when it comes to infantry and armor, the Marine Corps and the Army, okay, up until recently with the armor for the Marine Corps, are the ones who do the grunt of the fighting. Okay, and they are the ones that are up and close and personal with the enemy. Now, the Navy does have special forces. The Air Force has special forces, but overall, in a general sense, those are the two that are doing it. And you've heard constant reports of PT test scores had to be adjusted to allow women into certain MOSs. Okay, in the armor, the field that I'm doing my dissertation in, I've had countless reports of gunnery scores. Gunnery is simply a time where you on a tank fire downrange at targets. Some of them are moving, some of them are stationary, to give you a better sense of where you are if you are able to hit targets from a tank platform. Those scores have gone down dramatically. To quote a Lieutenant Colonel, I will keep his name out of it, he said that scores went from in the 800s or 900s to now in the 700s. Now, if you barely passed, you were doing well. And that simply wasn't the case. I know me personally, when I was in, if you got a 700, you got laughed off the gunnery range. That's just the way that it was. I don't think that it's right to make these changes to bring in a different group of people. If you cannot meet the standards, regardless of who you are, then I don't think you should be allowed to join that MOS. And unfortunately, I have yet to hear a report from anyone. And like I said, I've done a good mix of those who are active duty and veterans. I have yet to hear anyone tell me that this change made the military a better military. And I would make the argument, if the change that was made, if any change, whether it's uniforms, whether it's changing from a different tank to another, whether it's changing from an M16 rifle to an M4 rifle, whether it's changing from having a 120 howitzer for field artillery to a 155, any change you make, if it doesn't make the United States military better, then you should not do it. And I have yet to hear the statement or the reports that are saying making this change has made the United States military a better military. Now I'll be open to a conversation. I'll be open to discussion. I'm very interested to see how you guys feel about my video, and I look forward to hearing about your own videos and looking to your own personal videos that you've made.